Good evening, USA, and good morning, Asia. Welcome to the World Today discussion series hosted by the UCLA Center for Global Management. I'm Chris Tang. As the Faculty Director of the Center for Global Management, it is a privilege for me to moderate today's event. Today's event is also co-sponsored by the Impact Center at the Anderson School. Over the next hour, we shall be discussing with our two distinguished guests about various issues surrounding ESG. Now, based on our poll that we conducted on LinkedIn, 45% of our respondents that are familiar with ESG, which is great. And yet, 30% of them, they said they don't know much about it. So essentially, ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. Unlike corporate social responsibility that pressures a company to be accountable for its action, ESG is different. ESG aims at making a company's action and the outcomes measurable. Before I introduce our panelists this evening, let me say a few words about today's topic. The term ESG was debuted by the United Nations in 2006. Within 14 years, ESG has morphed into a $35 trillion ESG investing industry by 2020. Bloomberg estimates that this trend will continue to grow. It will reach around $53 trillion by 2025. Since 2018, the European Commission has a mandate requiring all financial advisors and financial markets research, they must incorporate ESG measures. In 2020, the United States SEC subcommittees recommended that all publicly traded firms must disclose ESG information. Ultimately, the ESG movement is monumental. But there are challenges. What are these ESG measurements about? How should firms collect this kind of data and provide this data to various ESG rating agencies, such as MSCI, Bloomberg, Dow Jones, and Morningstar? To answer these questions, it is my honor to have two experts joining me today. First, let me introduce Christine Low. Christine is currently the Chief Development Strategist at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Also, she is the former Undersecretary for the Environmentals for the Hong Kong government. Currently, she is teaching a wonderful MBA elective course at the Anderson School, the non-market risk. Next, it is my pleasure to introduce Magali Delmas. Maggie, that's what we call her, is our faculty director at the Center for Impact at the Anderson School. She is also a professor of management. Before joining UCLA, she was a professor of management at the UC Santa Barbara. Maggie, let me begin with you first, because you have published many research articles related to environmental measures and corporate ESG performance. Can you tell us briefly what ESG is and what are these measures and how are they computed? Because we don't know. Can you share with us, please?
Hi, Chris and Christine. Thank you so much for having me. It's a wonderful subject, and I'm in great company here. So, what are ESG? These three letters that we see everywhere. So these are, as you mentioned, these are a set of principles for socially responsible investors to use to screen potential investments. And socially responsible investors are investors that integrate personal values, societal concerns with their decisions. Basically, they exclude or include corporate securities in investment portfolio based on social, environmental, and governance criteria. So who are they? They are, individuals, institutions, corporations, universities, hospital foundations, insurance companies, and nonprofits. So it's what is extraordinary about this is the amount of money that's invested these days. And Christopher, you mentioned this, $1 trillion. It's just amazing how much investors in the last few years have taken on, kind of these sectors. So a drastic increase in the last few years. Some people say it's basically $1 out of $3 under professional management in the United States. So that's big. And what we know is that this means that being well rated on ESGs is now becoming important for firms to attract capital from investors. They cannot no more ignore environmental, social, and governance issues. Even Larry Fink, BlackRock CEO and an alum of the Anderson School, says he has, this company, BlackRock, investment company, said that companies need to contribute to society if they want to be, to get BlackRock support. So we see really tremendous interest. So this gives, of course, incentive for firms to care about environmental and social and governance issues. There are other reasons why they should be doing that, not just to get money, right? I mean, there are reasons. Sometimes we say, that despite, the negative externalities, firms could be more efficient and save money. They could get more consumers, and if they provide green products. So there are many reasons why they should do it even without this kind of, amount of money in investment. But that's kind of, important. What is different, I think, and I think that we should, talk about this. What's different about investors is that once they are shareholders, and then they can ask the firms to do things. So I think it could be very powerful to change firm behaviors. We have, part of this money, these $1 trillion that are spent, part of it is spent on shareholder resolutions, where shareholders are actually asking firms to do things. For example, we have the very recent case of McDonald's and the investor asking McDonald's to stop using pigs that are not humanly traded. We have a recent case, I think it's Heinz, with stakeholders asking them to have a resolution on changing plastic or not using, plastic or to reduce plastic and to have a specific goal. So what we see here that's different from before is that investors, because they are shareholders, they can really change what firms are doing. So I think it's a fundamental and important thing. The other, so now to respond to your question more directly, what are ESG metrics? So in general, when we think about this on the environmental side, it's about climate, energy efficiency, waste, water. On the social side, labor relations, diversity, community relations. On the corporate governance side, it's going to be also diversity at the board side, transparency, avoiding corruption and things like this. So there are plenty of metrics. I mean, hundreds of them, hundreds of ways to measure that. When we look at where the money is going, if I ask you what you think the money is going right now in terms of the top ESG metrics, the top ESG subjects, it's going mostly on climate change and carbon. So out of this, depending on, who is providing information, but from the Institute of Sustainable Finance, they said that $4.18 trillion are going to climate change. The next one is anti-corruption. Then we have board issues. And then executive pay is also very important. So these are the subjects. I think it's important to see, where does the money go? And then, climate change is definitely one big one. Okay, so now you're saying, what are the challenges? What are the measurements? How do we measure that stuff? Who measures that, right?
Oh, we're going to get back to you later, Maggie. That is wonderful.
Okay, so I'm done with that part. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much for your comprehensive answer. So now we learned that this ESG investing is actually empower, to a certain extent, empower the shareholder and the investors to encourage or to pressure firms that would do good in terms of the environment, in terms of worker safety, workers' compensation, and also maybe even DEI in terms of having more diverse board members. I think this is very good. So that means it's really shifting the power to the investors such that the investor can encourage firms to do something good for the society. That means that they will force a company to maybe to pay attention to the stakeholders, not just the shareholders. Now, Maggie, as you point out, there's so many measurements and there's so many standards. And I try to understand this measure myself because I do some work on that. But I got quite confused because there's so many frameworks and there's no united reporting standards. Some of the well-known ones are the Global Reporting Initiative, the GRI, and then there's one that's called SASB, not the FASB, SASB is a Sustainability Accounting Standard Board, and then there's also a task force on climate-related financial disclosure and all this. How come there's so many standards? So I'm going to ask Christine, because Christine has actually worked with a different agency to talk discussing issues. Right now there's an alphabet soup. And I think that most people are confused. Can you show why are there so many of them? Is it a good idea? There's so many of these kind of standards. Christine, you're on.
Okay. Well, the first point I really want to make is how did we get to all this ESG? You know, where did it really come from? And the start really is about trust. You know, you will remember in the late 90s and into the early 2000s, there was a lot of distrust about companies, questions about, companies, they're very large, they have more money than, small countries and so on. Executive pay was, really shooting up. And, this issue of trust, are businesses doing good for the world? Are their businesses doing the right thing? Are they concerning about environmental pollution and how do they treat their workers and so on and so forth, right? This is really the root of where it comes from. So that's why when we talk about shareholders, we used to say, this is the Milton Friedman time, right? Maximization of interest for shareholders. But today we're talking about stakeholders, which bring in everybody else. And even your shareholders today are quite activist. They're saying, well, there's got to be some social component and environmental component. So that's the background. As you can imagine, and Chris, you mentioned that in 2006, that was when the UN brought this up. I mean, this concept that investment decisions need to embody some non-financial aspects, because otherwise, companies can do what they want and may harm the environment and, harm workers and so on. So different types of organizations started to think about metrics. I mean, how do you measure these things? So you've got people who comes from an accounting background. You've got people who come from an environmental background. You've got people who come from, regulatory background. So they all came up with some ideas about how to do it. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I sit on the board of one of the disclosure companies, one of the earliest one called CDP. It's now called CDP, but it used to be the Carbon Disclosure Project, which in the year 2000, they wanted to measure climate-related, carbon-related, because climate change was becoming more and more important. So that's why you have, a whole bunch of different types of organization proposing metrics and standards and so on. Now, we're coming to a time where this is no longer a kind of minority issue that, it was the greenies or the people who are interested in social good that are into it. Now we're talking about investment decisions, billions and trillions of dollars. So there is this huge movement of getting organized. That's why you're hearing organizations also coming out to say, let's standardize things. So I think we're going from a rather messy situation today, quickly, probably in the next few years, to one that is better organized. And you now have some big brain organization working on it. The UN is working on it, the EU is working on it, and it's going from mandatory to regulatory. Going from voluntary to regulatory and mandatory. So as you go down this path, obviously you've got to be, you've got to standardize it. So the last thing I want to say here is, with our financial reporting, which is now, very standard all around the world, companies all have to do it in the same way. I think that going into the future, you're going to have standards and metrics that are going to be comparable. And people are going to be more careful about what to report. Because, I guess if you are collecting information, you're going to ask a company, give me everything possible. And people are not quite sure, do I really have to collect this and compile this? So I think we're also going into a time where we learn about the word materiality. We need to judge for a certain business or a certain industry, which are the metrics that are truly material. It's only through kind of lots of trial and error and thinking, are we going to be able to, over time, provide a set of standards and metrics where, everybody can kind of stick to.
Well, thank you. Well, I think that this is really in line with the discussion at the UN Climate Change Conference, the COP26 in Scotland a few months ago. And they're also pushing for the standardization of the reporting standards. Now, but then I have a question. When you have a standardized reporting, standardized framework, well, some will win, some will lose, depending on what is in, what is out. And also that's right now that currently the SEC, the ESG reporting is the data is self-certified. So I want to get back to Christine first and then come back to Maggie to comment on. When you talk about trust, now the issue about self-reporting data, self-certified, how can this data be trusted? What is your take on that, Christine?
Yeah, well, I think these things will all be sorted out. And this is why you're seeing the big four, right? They've told everybody we're investing, lots and lots of money. We're going to hire lots and lots of people. What is that an indication of? It's an indication that people are going to have to audit this. You're going to have some external organization looking through your reporting. This is kind of where we're going, which is why I'm saying one day you are in the not too distant future, you're going to see a much better organized system.
Okay, so we're not there yet. So Maggie,
we're not there yet. In between, a lot of mess and a lot of complaint.
Very good. Well, of course, this is a journey. Now, Maggie, what do you think? You've been really observing how this kind of reporting, how this kind of data collection. So the same question goes to you. Right now, currently,
right. I think it's a great question on where, we have this enormous amount of money that's flowing into something at this point that's completely vague and unclear. So there's kind of a little bit of a disconnect. There's big excitement, lots of money flowing, and then potentially lots of greenwashing. So the first issue is comparability standardization. And so there is this tension, between, the issue of, okay, I'm in that sector. For me, there are things that are important for my sector, and I want to report on that. Let's say, I'm in the energy, greenhouse gases emissions are going to be fundamental, and maybe I'm a bank, it's maybe less, although, things are changing. Well, that's fair enough. But for the environment, everybody's polluting, everybody's having an impact. How do you compare companies if not everybody's actually participating? So it's not a question of losers and winners. I mean, the losers, Chris, in that case, if we think only, to say, this is only for you sector, this is only for you sector, the loser is the environment or society as a whole. We need, I think, to have, like we do have for financial, metrics, everyone being able to disclose on this on the same metrics so we can evaluate, and people in their sectors can say, okay, my sector maybe not that important. I understand that, but maybe if we aggregate all of the impact in that sectors, it becomes a little bit more important, and we want to know what and things are evolving. Maybe this issue, just again, greenhouse gases emission was not material for some sectors 2 years ago, and now it's material for everyone. So I think we need really to kind of potentially, go away from this kind of issue of materiality. That's material for my firms, meaning I need to disclose because my shareholders need to know to invest what the risks are, to the concept, and that's where the Europeans are going to kind of, materiality for the planet. What is really material eventually? It's not just for me as a firm. I want to kind of see what's material for society. So I think that's where the discussion is quite interesting between, kind of this issue of specific sector metrics versus more general metrics. So the World Economic Forum, the Big Four and the World Economic Forum came together with a set of metrics. What they are saying are universal, 21 metrics that everybody should actually report on, where what they say everybody's already reporting on. So that's kind of interesting that you see kind of this development, and hopefully, this will be, kind of moving forward. So this is one point, standardization. The other point, very important, is weighting. What are the weights? We think ESG. So you're an investor. Which one are you going to put more weight on? On the S, on the E, on the G, on what? How do you make these decisions? And what I think the main problem is right now is that there's very little visibility for stakeholders more generally on how those who collect the data, which are for-profit organizations, actually collect the data and aggregate it and all of this. Because if they were to tell us exactly how they do things, then they would lose their competitive edge, right? We wouldn't know, anybody could imitate them. So basically, we have all of these rating agencies and or provider of data that have their kind of own kind of recipe. But us behind these walls can't know what actually is going on. So there is a little bit also of this problem of black box, kind of issue.
Right. Thank you, Maggie. That is really fantastic comment. In terms of data collection right now, company provide the data, maybe eventually, as Christine pointed out, there may be some form of audit. Now, but then once there's two school of thought. One school said, well, we should have standardized measures for all industries. The other one is, hey, one size does not fit all, because for service industry, for e-commerce, it's quite different from manufacturing. So therefore, the E and G could be different, right? So we have not settled the score yet. Now, come back to your point about the black box. I have met with MSCI as well as Morningstar, and they do admit that they do not disclose their algorithm, how to feed the data, compute the ratings, right? Now, because that is proprietary, then here's a question. Should this kind of weight, this kind of computation be fully disclosed? Because ESG is supposed to be pushing for transparency, to be trusted, as Christine pointed out. If I don't not understand of how the formula is being used, what kind of formula is being used, how can we trust the rating to as aggregate measures? So my question for Christine is given there's so many different ratings, different algorithms, and it's still a black box, then how can we trust, using your word trust, any of the ratings? Because we don't know what we are investing, because we don't know how they're being weighted. So as an investor, in the short term, maybe you are the optimist. In the long run, everything work out. But in the short term, there is still many, many $1 trillion is at stake. Then what do you think that is the right approach?
Well, I certainly think the algorithm, the methodology have to be disclosed. And if you look at CDP, which was organized as a non-profit, because the crux of the organization's mission is to do what you're saying, Chris. This is an offer to the world. This is a new area of knowledge. We need to innovate. We need to think about how to do it. And as Maggie put it so well, who's going to lose out? It's the planet and us. So therefore, it's very important for people to understand how you do your measurements. Right, and then the transparency and disclosure that comes with it. So I mean, the other thing is, of course, there's money to be made, and there's a lot of ignorance out there, even amongst the companies. I mean, I will say, for example, you have an organization that is, asking itself, okay, I need to get on the sustainability path. So who do I get to come and help me? So it's very easy to come to a brand name organization. I'm going to hire them, or I'm going to use them because they seem credible. And, companies and you could say clients are not necessarily asking, how you do it. What they're interested in is to have a good rating, So I think those things are going, it's not that people don't know them. We are bringing them up, and other people are bringing them up. So I mean, being an optimist, I'm an optimist because this is a pathway that we will now struggle through for the next 10 to 20 years. And Chris, you're absolutely right. If you're asking today, if you were to take a well-known, let's say US company or European company and dissect it and look into every aspect of how they report, you could very well find some areas that don't align very well. And, thank God there are NGOs and other people out there who are doing that sort of thing. And you do have reports coming out from these organizations that say, such and such a company, they said they're doing this, but they're not. And then you now have the regulators also looking, because trillions of dollars are going into it. So the Deutsche Bank case is, I think, seminal. So this was last year in August in the United States. The SEC went after Deutsche Bank and said, what you're talking about, your so-called green label products, we're not sure that they're so green. So I think once the regulators are asking this kind of question, obviously they have to disclose a lot of information that's going to get into the news and whatnot, right? So this is the sort of thing where you need many types of disciplines and many types of institutions to create eventually a system that people can, find quite trustworthy. I mean, today, frankly, if you're looking at the typical financial report, right? We all do it that way all over the world. But yet, do you know how to read it? Are you asking the right kind of questions? Well, that's a separate issue. But if you lied about it, well, somebody could sue you.
Very good, thank you. So in that case, in terms of transparency and trustworthiness is very important. Now that will lead to a question I'd like to ask Maggie. Maggie, you have mentioned to me that you are starting a project about a platform to collect ESG data. Can you tell us more about this and how does it work? Would that be even more transparent than other rating agencies, or tell us more about it, please?
Yeah, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to describe some of the work we are doing. I think that what happened, for some reason, I'm not sure, and maybe Christine has some ideas about this. Why is it so that the lead on all of these metrics has been taken by these rating organizations, and maybe a little bit less by researchers haven't, I think, been kind of at the forefront of that enough. If I look historically of what happened in the US, we had the toxic release inventory, and that was kind of providing this information, transparent information about what companies would release on the principle that it was the Right to Know Act, 1986. The principle that the community, citizens, should be able to know what's happening in their backyard, what pollution is coming into their backyard. And I think we're going back to kind of this, saying, this role of information to change behavior on, we need to know what companies are doing, all of us, not just actually investors, all of us. But right now, this information, because it's not mandated, is really only in the hands of those who can pay for it, right? Those who can have, and even when they pay for it, because at the Anderson School, we have purchased some of this data, we realized that they can't tell us much about how they actually they came up with the information. So we're paying for data, we don't even know where it comes from. So anyway, so what we decided to do at the Center for Impact at Anderson is to collect data, as you were saying, Christine, to collect data on firms that are, on what they are disclosing. We're using the World Economic Forum framework, which has, 4 different pillars: governance, planet, people, and prosperity. And we're collecting information on what firms, disclose for the Fortune 300 right now. We're hoping for S&P 500. And our goal is to make this information public, to make it available, and with the method on how we, kind of collected the data, so that could help potentially firms to compare themselves in one sector, or and make improvements. Maybe they are not very good in that sector at, first of all, disclosing, and then maybe their performance is not as good, or maybe they are very good and they want to show off and they want to tell others how they're doing. We also want to make this information available to researchers to improve on the metrics. What we learned from our initial analysis is that on all of these metrics, remember, I said 21 metrics that are supposed to be like the most used by, you know, kind of companies, only 50% of the firms disclose on this metric. So the disclosure rate is 50%. It's very, very low, right? And most of it is on qualitative data, which means firms are just writing stories, but we have very little in quantitative data on actually measuring, okay, what exactly is your impact, but very little on quantitative. It's a lot of, you know, kind of glossy reporting that firms are doing. And so this needs to change. We need to provide them with some, you know, maybe, you know, kind of guidelines on how to do this better. So that's what, you know, we're calling this the Open for Good platform. And we're hoping that next year it will be available for our community and our students for all of us to learn more about what is currently disclosed, how it is disclosed, and how we can improve the metrics that we see.
Yeah, this is very exciting. Maggie, congratulations. Now, this is also in line to what France and Netherlands are pushing EU to actually ensure that the data prominence in terms of the origin of the data, how the data were collected to be disclosed. So I think the Open for Good is a great idea. Now, but then this is really a monumental effort.
Yeah.
Then also that in terms of to ensure that the data is truly genuine and correct, that is also a tricky element. So in that case, the question is that would that open some kind of liability issues? So Christine is trained in law, so I'm going to ask.
We can ask Christine to help us, but just to.
This kind of data collection and disclosure by companies, when they were submitted to the rating agencies or submitted to Maggie's Open for Good platform, if they were caught the data is not exactly genuine, who is liable? Is there liability issues?
So just to kind of, before Christine helps with this, you know, the Carbon Disclosure Project is actually a good example, and Christine can talk more about this, but it's really kind of the same spirits. You know, it was for carbon, but can we do a carbon disclosure project for everything where, you know, companies are disclosing, and since their information is already public, we're just taking things that is public, is their liability. Christine, what do you think?
Well, I think the main thing is before we go into liability, I think, Maggie, what you want to do, as you say, you know, it's a very big undertaking. And I hope anyone who might be watching this will be offering you substantial funding, right, to get it done. And there is a difference between academic doing it and commercial companies doing it. Academics doing it simply do not have enough time and resources to get it all done quickly, that somebody can buy the service, right? So I do think the academic rigor is really important. So we need to look at some kind of collaboration. I mean, you know, CDP is structured as a non-profit, but, you know, even there, even though it has the largest reservoir of environmental data going back to, I think, you know, the year 2000, when other commercial companies come in, they can run past you very quickly. So I think the role of the universities is how to keep everybody honest, because whatever you can dig out for however many number of companies and industries that you can do will create a major stir, you know, because you can back it up with, I think, academic rigor. So that's the first point I want to make. Now, in terms of liability, what is the, I think it will go back to what is the purpose of that data and who is disclosing to whom. If you're sweeping up data and you're putting it out there as a narrative, right? This is what I see from this company. That's different from an organization that says my products, right? This is what I'm doing. And that happens to be inaccurate or false. Then, of course, there's the issue of intention. Did you make a mistake, a genuine mistake? Or is this something that you're negligent about, or it was intentional that you wanted to deceive, right? So I think all these issues then come into it as to whether somebody, you know, somebody could be liable.
Yeah, no, I think this is an interesting question. I guess, you know, providing the opportunity for firms to give their own, you know, response and change their, you know, kind of if we made a mistake or, you know, if something was not available, if they want to make it available, then it becomes, there's an opportunity for them to change it. So that might be a way to make sure that everybody's on the same page.
I think there's also another issue there, because we're talking about different types of emissions or activities, right, that you're going to measure, and you want it to be quantitative, no longer just a company doing its own narrative, right, about what they're doing. This will require collaboration between, let's say, the accounting schools, the business schools, the law schools, the engineering school, the School of Science, and so on and so forth, because we need to have some understanding of how these things can be measured. And as you go along, because we're talking about processes, in science that we don't necessarily all know, we know kind of enough to do sort of basic measurements, but as we go forward, I think, again, the university, the brain power, the big brains in universities, if they can be properly funded to answer these questions and to offer it out there, I think it would be terrific. And it would be even better if international, if a number of universities around the world could actually work together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christine, for sharing your legal expertise. I think it's very, very insightful and very helpful, and also to give us some food for thought in terms of how academia can collaborate with each other as well as industry. Now, both you and Maggie are seemingly very supportive of this movement. I think this is great. Now, but we have to keep in mind there are critics out there. So right now, actually, there are some critics who say, well, the data is not trustworthy. But even if the data even is trustworthy, it does not really help the ESG investing. Let me use one example. This person is a former investment executive of BlackRock, and his name is Tariq Fancy. He has written in various articles and also in certain interviews. He argued that the ESG investing is indeed ineffective, and also that he believed that it's actually misleading investors with false hope. Now, assuming that in the future the data will be better, the process will be better, we hope that's the case. But in the meantime, what would you say to maybe to have this kind of critics to believe that there is genuine movement, that eventually this would become a good thing? Maybe I start with Christine. Christine, you go first.
Okay. The reality is, if you're juxtaposing profitability and ESG and so on, right? Yes, that's not clear, and it's arguable. But when regulators get into it, and when regulators and countries around the world are actually saying, for example, the environment, climate change, this is a global problem, we're going to have to struggle through this to get it right, then I think it's no point saying the ESG is unimportant, because in the end, what we are trying to do is, well, we need some measurements to know the impact coming from commercial activities. So I think that argument is we can deal with that. Then about social issues. And I think in the boardroom today, one of the biggest concerns post-COVID is about the worker, and I would like to think that no worker, no profit, no good workers, no profit. If you can't, we're past the days where you can earn more money by punishing the worker, right? So this kind of thinking, again, the S side, and working conditions need to be, healthy and well-being being considered. So again, the worker and the working conditions going to cost more money, because we want the whole business to be more sustainable in the long run, and political and social instability is actually bad for business. So it's worthwhile, right? It's worthwhile for companies to rethink how it's going to have sustainable profits going forward with its workforce and taking care of the environment and its own governance, better governance for the company.
Well said. I think that maybe the ESG is the guiding force to help company, to guide them to do the right thing. So we're not there yet, but hopefully that with kind-hearted people, with the governments, with the NGOs, with the university, with companies working together, we can make a difference. Now, I will ask Maggie, do you have anything to add to it in terms of what will you say to the critics? They say, well, so far the empirical evidence, there's the researchers, they actually study all the ratings. They found that there's no predictability about in terms of the company's performance. Then there are critics out there. How do you convince them otherwise?
Right. So I agree with Christine about the importance of regulation there. So I think the critics are really saying, well, there's the investors in some ways are doing this. It's kind of symbolically, but they are not really serious about it. If they were really serious about it, the metrics would be different. So because it's voluntary in terms of, we're talking about voluntary reporting, voluntary, disclosing of these metrics, we do have, kind of this confusion. As soon as it becomes mandated, I think we need to kind of come up to an agreement of what this should be, and then everybody's on the same page. And then kind of there is also audits of the process. So we have the right metrics, and some of them are quantified, and we have kind of audit on the process, and all of this kind of becomes something that is credible. And then kind of everybody is on the same page. So I think we are. The problem is that the critics are saying there's all this money, and investors in some ways are protecting themselves on this and saying we're doing the right thing, when in fact we know now that they're still investing in some in things that are not ESG, even though they say they are ESGs. And so we need regulation to come into this this space. And I come back to the toxic release inventory. How did they do that? They came up with like mandated disclosure on a set of toxic releases that were evaluated, and then firms, after this was issued, decreased their toxic releases because they didn't want to be seen as kind of having such an important impact on the environment, devastating impact on the environment. So this was very, very important. So I think we'll see what happens in Europe, and that will be kind of a first step, and that's going to have a big impact of what's going on here, because we can't ignore what's going on in Europe, especially for global organizations. So I see really kind of things going in the right direction, and I see this sector, and I'm thinking about our students here. This is an amazing thing. I mean, it is an amazing sector to invest in. There's just tremendous impact that the students can have in developing, the types of metrics that will be, in the future being used. And so it's an exciting, area. There's lots of jobs going on. We have PwC was saying they will hire 100,000 people in the next 5 years. It's like enormous. So students who have an interest in finance and the environment and social issues want to bring both of them. There's tremendous opportunities for them. And at Anderson, we are actually teaching classes. So I just wanted to announce that we have 2 new classes. One class that was offered last year as a 2-unit, an ESG class offered by Brad Parks, and this year it's 4 units, is the executive director of the Prince's Accounting for Sustainability Project, A4S. This is an initiative led by the Prince Charles, which kind of put together a group of chief financial officers who want to think about these issues. So is offering this class, and it's a tremendous class. We've had the first 2-unit class was great last year. We also have 2 professors, faculty of Anderson, one Henry Friedman and Valentin Haddad, one from accounting, the other one from finance, getting together to offer also an ESG class. They teamed up to create this new exciting class that will bring accounting and finance for to understand ESG issues. So these 2 classes are going to be offered in the spring. The first one I think is on Thursday afternoon, and the second one on Wednesday evening. So if you are interested, we are offering these types of classes. So please sign up.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that is really indeed, in terms of you point out and Christine point out, the auditing process and also the regulation may come into place. But I think that we also should not lose sight this ESG is multidisciplinary. It's not just only the business school. We have to really collaborate with law school and also engineering school in the science to really understand different aspects of ESG as well. So I do see that in terms of our younger generation, they do show interest. So in real time, I'm going to switch over to the audience that submitted many questions, and in real time can only pick a few of them, and apologize if the question is not being selected. So on Slido, the first question is submitted by Amit. The question is, investment decisions based on ESG metrics is great. Can you give us some examples where companies publish their metrics and so that the regulators can quantify or audit it? Is there any full disclosure, any companies?
Well, there are, maybe the way to answer this question is, there are companies that have been making disclosures, and you can go and read their reports, and some of them are clearly better than others. And now you are beginning also to have scholars and NGOs, and now, I mean, I think with regulators getting interested, you are having people looking at them much more critically, and hence, you know, you have the SEC probing into Deutsche Bank, right? So I don't know whether you're asking us whether we want to name a series of these better companies or not. I will refrain from doing so, but many of the well-known companies publish them. And if you took 10 of them, just randomly, any 10 of them, you can see quite a lot of differences.
If I want to kind of talk about what we've been looking at this so far, 314 companies, the biggest companies in the United States, the richest, the most successful one, as I mentioned, the disclosure on the supposedly main metrics, from the World Economic Forum, we are at less than 50%. The top one, I'm looking in the stat now, is 74%, and the one that is disclosing the less is 14%. So you can see kind of there is a wide range. We never go to 100% of, they disclose everything. So we don't yet have that because there is also no standard. For example, looking at the World Economic Forum, maybe some companies are disclosing on something else that's, maybe more relevant to them. So, but we can see that in general, the level of disclosure is never, completely perfect. But if you want to get more info into the details, I'm happy to talk about this.
Yeah, but also just go into the website of CDP. There's a lot of information there, and you can find out also compilation of industries and so on. So that's a good way to just get yourself into the topic.
Yes, a very good advice. So right now, based on my understanding, that is all this data then self-reporting, and it's also that there's no standardized format or what to report. So as a result, it is rather difficult to form any kind of regulations to audit and whatnot. We're not quite there yet. But as you both ladies point out, that it's going to happen in the future. All right, let's move on to the next question. The next question is that, well, it's seemingly ESG issues can be political. Then it's how can we depoliticize ESG issues and take the politics out of the question?
Maybe one way of answering that question is the EU is a driver in disclosure, and they have passed laws, and from January of this year, they have something called taxonomy, which is a classification, a kind of labeling schemes for which kinds of projects are green. So I think looking that the EU wants to drive this. China is looking and working with the EU on adopting, again, a set of rules itself over time that will dovetail with EU rules. So I think the politicization or the politics of this is also a cross-boundary regulatory issue. So, but watch the space. What we want is for countries to actually work together, because only with them working together can, over time, that we can have a set of much more uniform metrics and standards.
Okay. Well, the next question, let's move on. The next question is, well, a lot of companies saying that they want to be carbon negative by 2030. But is there such anything to actually hold them accountable for that statement? Would they actually truly honor that? Because saying is easy, saying it, then actually achieving it.
Yeah, well, not just companies, but also countries, right? Countries have said we're going to be carbon neutral by 2050 or whatever, right? So I think the first thing you need to look at is where a company is located. If a company has, let's say, a factory somewhere in the world, and that country or that region has no particular plans for decarbonization, well, then you're probably not going to make it unless you say that somehow you're going to generate clean energy yourself. But to be carbon negative means you're better than carbon neutral. So how you're going to do it, I think I'm going to have to ask these companies to provide their plans. I mean, actually, how are you going to do it?
Yeah, so the issue with these statements, they are easy to make, and 2030 or something is very long, especially for a CEO who is evaluated every quarter and who probably won't be there, at the time of the kind of the date, target date. So it's really hard. I agree with Christine. Most of them at this point, they issue the statements. It's not really backed up by, with a very specific plan. And they don't really know exactly what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. And that's not very surprising. I mean, we see that with politicians. We see that here in California, they've issued the regulations without really knowing how to get there. So, in some ways that gives, a sense of direction. And it's nice to see this enthusiasm. The problem is, whether they actually will follow up. So I see that shareholders' resolutions could be, a way to get there with asking for plans and specifics. But otherwise, there's a lot of empty words sometimes.
Yeah, thank you. I think that at one point, I think that in terms of, I fully agree with Christine, it's not just achieving it. It's we need to understand how do they do it. So for example, if you want to reduce carbon footprint, well, depending on how supply chain carbon emission is being reported in terms of, I could just push all the factories further out to other countries. So in that case, if I don't report it, I look very clean. For example, in the G or the S measures, if it's I want to report that I increase the salary for my employees, what I can do is I can lay off all the lower income employees and outsource to another firm, then all the remaining employees in my firm will have a high salary. So it's not just in terms of achieving the target. We must keep in mind, how do they do it? Whether it's done in an ethical manner. So that is very important as well. All right, thank you.
Yes, and if I can follow up on that, I think it's important. So, we as a, kind of educators also have a role to play in terms of what we teach our students and on what, kind of the ethical part of this and what is the role of business in society. So yeah, we will, even if we have all of these rules, there are always people who are going to manipulate them. We've seen that with, just financial metrics, and we've seen that not long ago. So I think we have a role to play in bringing maybe more classes that are kind of going through the, what are the processes, what are the important things to think about as a leader, as a business leader, in thinking about the long term and in thinking about society.
Well, maybe I can be permitted as a visiting professor to say this. I would very much like to see these elective classes become part of the core curriculum.
Including business ethics as well. Yes.
I mean, at Anderson, and
Right.
then you'll be a leader, if you were requiring all students to at least have some one-on-one understanding on these issues.
Thank you. Next, moving on. The next question is submitted by Elena Fember 2022. Previous question, they're anonymous, so I don't know who submitted the questions. Thank you very much for a great seminar today. What do you see as the most important immediate next steps that will happen in the ESG space? What is the biggest thing in the ESG space next? Well,
I would say it's the OFG platform. So it's It's providing information available to everyone. I mean, how do standards appear? It's the more people use a specific metrics, the more they use, something that's available, the more likely it's going to be used, right? So I think we need more transparency and more people within academia to jump on this. Of course, as Christine said, we'll have regulations, and that's kind of going to be really important to have, kind of the structure and the kind of the infrastructure also to put all the data together. But I strongly believe that we need a CDP for all the metrics, basically, but this, being done in academia. That's what we need. The real.
I also want to just make one last point, because I know time is running out. Not all investments that don't qualify as ESG is bad, by the way. Because the reason is, and I'm putting my hat back on, and last year, at CGM, we had a webinar talking about energy. And the world needs energy. Energy is really important. Fossil fuel, yes, we want it to phase down and then phase out, but investment still needs to go into fossil fuel to clean it up, to capture. I mean, there are technologies that are still necessary because we cannot just get out of fossil fuels. Those will not qualify as perhaps ESG investments, but they're not unimportant.
Thank you. Well, we have the last question. This is from Claudia Martins. The question is, industry at one point they are of harmonization, but now the different countries, they have different ways of thinking about ESG and different issues. How do you bring different countries to get on the same page? Then we can come to develop a common platform, a common standardized measures. Is it possible? Because right now the world is so polarized.
Yeah, it is possible. It's happening. So China and the EU working on hopefully a common set of taxonomy, because the EU is ahead. So China wants to work with the US, work with the EU, precisely because the EU is ahead. So I think the Americans are getting interested, and you have platforms, TCFD and all these acronyms that you might have heard of that we don't have time to go into. So I do see collaboration across jurisdictions. Well, we'll need a lot more of it, obviously.
Yeah, so there are some issues that are easier than others to see where there is more agreement. So greenhouse gas emissions, I think this is a place where we will see standardization. On the social issue, I'm not there yet. So I see that in the US, there's a little bit of reluctance to kind of go that route. In Europe has been always kind of more into social questions. And so I think there are differences in cultures and kind of practices, and also kind of issues depending on the country. But I see really on carbon, we'll get somewhere in terms of standardization, I think pretty soon.
Well, thank you. Well, I think we all three of us really agree. ESG, environmental, social, and governance are very important elements. And hopefully through this common interest from different companies, different investors, our younger generations, our students, and government, we can all work together to not just for us, it's for the world, right? So on this note, I really learned quite a great deal from both of you in terms of hopefully that's through this kind of ESG movement, we can build more trust in people, in company, in government, such that we can live in harmony. So on this note, I want to thank both of you for sharing your insight with us, and also want to thank our audience tonight. And thank you very much for the privilege of your time. And thank you so much, and have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, Chris.